When people imagine the Wild West, they picture gunslingers, dusty towns, and campfire beans bubbling under the stars. But no one talks about what it actually took to stay alive when the pantry was empty, hunting failed, and winter refused to end. Because the truth is, food on the frontier wasn't just scarce, it was sometimes barely edible. In a world with no refrigeration, no supply trucks, and no guarantees, people ate what they had to. And what they had to eat would turn most modern stomachs. Forget romantic notions of roasted game and hearty stews. Real frontier meals were often tough, strange, and downright revolting. From boiling leather boots to chewing bricks of moldy hardtack, survival meant making peace with hunger and lowering your standards. Way down. So if you think you've ever had a rough dinner, buckle up. Because we're counting down the top 10 things people ate in the Old West to survive. And trust us, they weren't doing it for the flavor. Top 1. Boiled leather, when your boots became dinner. When the pantry was empty and hunting failed, some frontier folks did the unthinkable. They cooked their shoes. Literally. Boiled leather was a last resort meal during sieges, blizzards, or journeys gone horribly wrong. The idea came from survival lore going back centuries. If it's made from animal hide, maybe it still counts as food. Cowboys, soldiers, and settlers would rip soles from their boots, belts, or saddle straps, scrape off the dirt and grime, and toss the leather into a boiling pot of water. The cooking process could take hours. The leather needed to soften enough to chew, and sometimes it was boiled with a few wild herbs or ashes to add flavor. The result? A gummy, bitter mess that stuck to your teeth and did almost nothing to fill your stomach. Worse, leather in the Old West wasn't pure. It was often treated with chemicals like lime or urine during tanning. Eating it meant risking poisoning or stomach ulcers. But when the alternative was starvation, many took the risk. This wasn't some quirky cowboy snack. It was what you ate when the animals were gone, the snow was too deep, and your ribs were starting to show. So the next time you complain about stale crackers, remember, somewhere in the Old West, a man once looked at his boots and thought, "Dinner's ready." Top 2. Roasted rats and prairie dogs. Small game, big desperation. In the Old West, when food ran out and options got lean, people turned to whatever had meat on its bones, even if it squeaked. Roasted rats and prairie dogs weren't delicacies. They were survival wrapped in fur. Settlers, trappers, and desperate townsfolk often faced long winters, failed hunts, or isolation that left them miles from a decent meal. That's when the smaller, often overlooked critters became dinner. Rats were caught in traps or hunted in barns. Prairie dogs, those chirping, burrowing rodents of the plains, were smoked out of their holes or shot from a distance. Neither came with a recipe, but the process was always the same. Skin, gut, roast over fire, and try not to think too hard about what you were eating. Despite their size, these animals had one key benefit. They were everywhere. And in a place where deer and buffalo weren't always available, or allowed, rat or prairie dog stew could mean the difference between starvation and survival. Sure, they weren't exactly rich in flavor, and disease was always a risk. But when the wind howled, the snow piled high, and your belly hadn't been full in days, that scrawny prairie dog roasting on a stick started to smell a lot like hope. In the Old West, if it moved, it might have ended up on your plate. Top 3. Flour and water. Glue cakes, the bare minimum of baking. When you're stuck in the middle of nowhere with nothing but a tin of flour and a prayer, you don't bake a cake, you make survival paste. Known by some as glue cakes or cowboy flapjacks, these pitiful patties were the Old West's answer to hunger when all the real food was gone. The recipe was as simple as it was sad. Mix flour with water until it holds together. Maybe toss in a pinch of salt if you had it, then slap it onto a hot rock or skillet over the fire. The result? A chewy, tasteless rubbery disc that looked like bread, felt like drywall, and tasted like desperation. These weren't made for flavor. They were made to fill stomachs and keep bodies moving. Cowboys, miners, and stranded travelers lived off this stuff when supply wagons didn't show or hunts came up empty. Sometimes they'd char the outside to make it feel more like food. Other times, they'd soak it in grease or drippings just to make it chewable. No sugar, no yeast, no hope of a soggy middle or golden crust. Just carbs and grit. In the West, a warm slice of cake didn't come with frosting. It came with blisters, soot, and the bitter knowledge that tomorrow's dinner might just be more of the same. Top 4. Lard soup. Yes, just fat. A hot bowl of desperation. When times got tough, and in the Old West they usually were, people didn't just tighten their belts. They boiled the contents of the pantry, even if the only thing left was fat. Enter lard soup. No vegetables, no meat, no broth. Just water and fat, boiled together into a greasy, sludgy mess that passed for dinner on the harshest nights. If you were lucky, there might be a bone to toss in for flavor. But mostly, this was a survival meal for people who'd already eaten through the good stuff, the bad stuff, and were now scraping the bottom of the barrel, literally. Cowboys and settlers would scoop hardened animal fat, beef tallow, bacon grease, or pork lard into a pot, add water, and stir until it became a pale, oily soup. Sometimes they added stale bread chunks or bits of dried flour paste to thicken it. Sometimes they didn't even have that. Nutritionally, it was high in calories. That's about the only nice thing to say. Drinking a bowl of melted lard sounds like a punishment. But in the Old West, it was survival. When winter cut off supply routes, or when drought killed crops and game, people made do. Even if it meant sipping fat with a spoon and pretending it was soup. Because when the frontier got cold, greasy was good enough. Top 5. Raw or sun-dried meat, sometimes green, chewing on survival forget perfectly grilled steaks. In the Old West, meat was often eaten raw, sun-dried, or halfway to rotten, and that was on a good day. Cowboys and settlers on long cattle drives or isolated homesteads didn't always have time, firewood, or energy to cook. So what did they do? They sliced meat thin, laid it on rocks or hung it on lines, and let the sun do the rest. This was jerky, but not the kind you'd buy at a gas station today. It was often tough as leather, full of grit, and occasionally a little green around the edges. Yes, green. Meat left out too long or stored in poorly sealed bags could start to spoil. But out on the frontier, the motto was, eat it or starve. People would scrape off the mold, cut around the rot, and chew through what was left, sometimes washing it down with river water or whiskey. Cooking was a luxury. Food safety was a fantasy. Some native tribes and mountain men ate raw meat straight from a fresh kill, believing it kept nutrients intact. Others used salt to preserve slabs, though that only delayed spoilage in the brutal summer heat. So next time you bite into a juicy burger, remember, back in the day, dinner might have been raw, sunburned beef jerky, cracked teeth optional and seasoning, whatever blew in with the dust. Top 6. Stewed frogs, lizards, and snakes. The swamp to plate special. In the Old West, when meat was scarce and hunger was high, anything that crawled, slithered, or hopped had a shot at ending up in your stew pot. Frogs, lizards, and snakes weren't delicacies. They were dinner. And not just for the desperate. For many settlers, especially those in arid regions or traveling through rough terrain, these creatures were often the most available source of protein. Stewed snake was surprisingly common, especially rattlesnake, which pioneers claimed tasted like chicken, probably because they wanted to forget what it really was. Frogs were boiled or fried whole if you had oil. And lizards? Tossed into a pot with a few herbs, if you had any, or just eaten plain. No sauce, no seasoning, just survival. The real culinary tragedy? You had to skin them, gut them, and hope they weren't carrying parasites. Cooking methods were basic: fire, boiling water, if you had any, and maybe a tin cup. Sometimes these animals were caught fresh. Sometimes they were found, already dead, and recent enough. But for frontiers people, squeamishness wasn't an option. Protein was protein. So while Hollywood shows cowboys roasting steak by a campfire, the truth is that plenty of nights ended with a charred snake on a stick or a frog in the pot, eyes and all. Survival wasn't pretty, but it was occasionally amphibian. Top 7. Hardtac, the biscuit that could break your teeth and maybe your will to live. Hardtac was the frontier version of a granola bar. If granola bars were flavorless, rock hard, and capable of surviving the apocalypse. Made from just flour, water, and sometimes salt, if you were lucky. This brick of a biscuit was cheap, long-lasting, and nearly indestructible, which also meant almost inedible. Cowboys, soldiers, pioneers, all carried hardtac on long journeys, not because they liked it, but because it never went bad. You could store it for years, and it would still look and taste exactly the same. Dry, dense, and soul-crushingly bland. Biting into fresh hardtac could chip a tooth. Old hardtac? You didn't bite it, you soaked it. In water, coffee, soup, or whiskey. And even then, it was more like chewing damp drywall. If you were really unfortunate, it came with bonus protein, weevils, worms, or mold that had moved in over time. Still, it kept you alive, barely. And while Hollywood shows cowboys chomping into tender biscuits fresh from a campfire, the truth is, many were gnawing on what felt like compressed sawdust, just trying to make it through one more mile, one more day, one more storm. Hardtac didn't make anyone happy, but it made them full enough to keep going. Sort of. Top 8. Cow brains, eyes, and hooves, no part wasted, no matter how squishy. When you butchered a cow in the Old West, you didn't toss the weird parts, you used them. Because out on the frontier, waste wasn't an option, and meat was meat, even if it stared back at you. Brains were scrambled with eggs or fried into patties. People claimed they were rich in nutrients, soft in texture, and delicate in flavor, which, depending on your stomach, either meant fancy or nauseating. The problem? No refrigeration. Brains go bad fast, and cooking them wrong could turn frontier delicacy into emergency outhouse visit. Eyes weren't common, but they were eaten, usually roasted or boiled, often just tossed in with other scraps. Think of it as an accidental garnish, protein-packed, jelly-like, and slightly unnerving when it bursts in your mouth. And then there were the hooves. No, folks didn't gnaw on them like chicken wings, but they did boil them down into a jelly called calf's foot jelly. This gelatinous goop could be eaten sweetened with molasses or salt, and it was praised as healing food, a weird cousin to modern bone broth, if your broth jiggled like dessert. So while Hollywood shows cowboys chewing steak by the fire, the truth is, many were spooning down calf jelly and hoping not to bite into something that blinked. Because in the Old West, you ate what you had, even if it came from the head, not the hide. Top 9. Insects and grubs, because bugs don't run fast. When game was scarce, vegetables were non-existent, and your stomach wouldn't stop growling. Bugs became survival food. And on the frontier, no protein was off limits, no matter how many legs it had. Grasshoppers, crickets, beetles, and even juicy white grubs were all on the menu. They were easy to catch, didn't require ammunition, and packed more nutrition than you'd expect. Some pioneers roasted them over open flames. Others crushed them into a powder and stirred them into stews. A few brave souls even ate them raw, straight from the log. To Native American tribes and experienced scouts, bugs weren't weird. They were a proven survival staple, especially in harsh seasons. Grasshoppers roasted with a bit of salt, if you had any, were crunchy, earthy, and, let's say, acquired in taste. Grubs, on the other hand, were soft and nutty, if you could get past the squirm. And while settlers from the east often gagged at the idea, after a few weeks with no fresh meat, insects didn't seem so disgusting anymore. Hunger makes you rethink everything. So no, cowboys weren't just eating beans and bacon. Sometimes dinner crawled out of a tree stump, and they chased it down with a smile or a gag. Top 10. Salted mystery meat. Don't ask what it was. If something was meat-shaped and didn't smell too rotten, odds are someone in the Old West salted it and called it dinner. Welcome to the world of mystery meat, where survival meant not asking too many questions. Salted meat was a staple on the frontier because it lasted. You could pack it for weeks without refrigeration, and it wouldn't spoil, at least not completely. Problem is, no one kept nutrition labels. That beef in the barrel? Might have been mule, might have been horse, might have been anything unlucky enough to get caught and butchered. Meat was cut into chunks, packed in salt, and left to cure in wooden barrels. When it came time to eat, it was boiled, sometimes multiple times, to remove the excess salt. Though that rarely worked. The result was a chewy, tough slab of protein that tasted like leather dipped in seawater. Frontiersmen joked that you had to soak it so long, the flavor moved to the water. Settlers added it to stews, beans, or hardtac, anything to soften the blow and the bite. But when it's midwinter, you're snowed in, and the last wild game ran off months ago, you don't ask what animal it was, you ask if there's any left. So the next time someone romanticizes the Old West, dusty trails, rugged cowboys, wide-open freedom, just remember, they were probably chewing on a boiled boot, washing it down with lard soup, and wondering if the thing they just ate used to bark. Survival on the frontier wasn't about flavor. It was about not starving. People ate whatever they could catch, kill, dig up, or scrape off a barrel. If it had calories, it was on the menu, no matter how much it smelled, wiggled, or stared back. There were no picky eaters out there, just hungry people and very low standards. But that's what made the settlers tough. They didn't just tame the West, they choked it down one revolting bite at a time. And here at Beyond the Wild West, we're serving up more than myths. We're giving you the gritty truth, bite by bite, bullet by bullet, and blister by blister. If you survived this episode with your appetite intact, hit subscribe, ring the bell, and saddle up for more unfiltered history from the dirtiest corners of the past. Because out here, it wasn't just wild, it was inedible. Cowboy,